Hello, so this week I wanted to follow up on the last video I made, which was how to lose fat and keep it off. Only this time I wanted to cover off the most common mistakes that people make, just to give you a little bit of a different perspective. You know, because sometimes when you look at things in a different way, more points land and things become a little bit more apparent. So just a quick summary before we get started. The most common mistakes I see are too much too soon, not recovering calories once a goal is reached, not dealing with the reason why you gained the weight in the first place, over exercising, jumping on a diet trend, and not making a plan. So let's start with too much too soon. So often we're super impatient and we just want to get the weight off as soon as possible. The only problem with this is that the body has mechanisms in place to make you fail at this. If you're morbidly obese, then drastic fat loss is not as scary because the body is kind of unsafe in its state. So it's not really going to matter if it loses weight quickly. But if you're around a healthy weight, if you're overweight in a way, but the body's not too threatened by that, then drastic reductions in calories and going too hard too soon is going to backfire. So with fat loss, every single time, without question, what we want to do is create maximal fat loss response in the body. So a healthy amount of fat loss per week. It's usually about a half a kilo or a pound if that's your metric. And we want to do that by making the most minimal change possible. So we're trying to eliminate any stress on the body as we go through this process. So for example, it might look like reducing the amount of junk food someone consumes daily. So if you're someone that eats a lot of junk food, you probably don't even need to track yet. You just want to start reducing the amount of that junk food you consume. Maybe you want to add in a little bit of activity if you're inactive. If you're only mildly overweight or if you're actually a healthy weight, you need to start tracking your food. Or you just need to begin a calorie controlled diet. Let's just say you consume about 3,000 calories a day or 2,000 calories a day, and you know that these are your maintenance calories. See my last video if you want to understand that one a little bit more. You would just take 500 calories a day off that, or burn 500 calories a day through activity, and that's going to lead to fat loss. But that's all you want to do. You know, you wouldn't want to do, okay, I'm going to do 500 calories worth of extra activity. I'm going to cut my calories down by 500, and I'm going to eliminate all dairy, carbs, and grains from my diet. You know, you don't have to do all of those things. It's the simplest and smallest thing you can change possible to get the maximal result. You work out exactly where you're starting from and what your maintenance calories are by just entering every single thing you eat and drink honestly into an app like MyFitnessPal over 7 days. The longer you do it for, the better. But you really want to get an idea of how much you're actually eating in order to maintain the weight that you are right now. If you can just do 5 weight training sessions a week and lower your calories by 500 per day, let's just say from 2,400 down to 1,900, this is most likely going to give you a result. And if it does, you don't want to do any extra. You don't want to speed the process up. You don't want to push harder. There's absolutely no reason for it. Generally, we only choose a 1,200 calorie diet because it is made popular in the media. But for most people, unless you're 42 kilos, this is just not enough food. Especially not at the start of a diet process, because where are you going to go from there? There's nowhere to go. You need to ladder calories down as you diet, your metabolism adapts. So if you did start at that 1,900, within about 6 to 8 weeks, it will have dropped. So what was a deficit at 1,900, that's not actually going to be a deficit anymore. So from there, you'll need to lower it down another 100 calories or 150 calories, and you have to keep repeating that process. So if you've got 20 kilograms to lose, you can't start on 1,200. You have to start on the highest possible amount of food that you can start on with the lowest amount of activity, but you do still have to move. So it just means you don't do double cardio. You know, 1 session per day is plenty. So that's the first point. The second point I see really often with people who actually have a really great success in their weight loss, and they just make this one wrong step which gets them stuck in this loop and then finding themselves with negative metabolic adaptations after, and that is not returning your calories back up to maintenance or not doing a reverse diet after you've done a diet period. So let's just say you started at 80 kilos and then you finished at 65 and you're happy, but at this weight you're eating 1,500 calories per day. So there's nothing wrong with this because you're probably still in a healthy space and you've lost all that fat. So your body's actually a little bit healthier now and it's feeling better. You're probably feeling more vibrant, more energized. But then what people do is they get confused and they don't understand that they're in a deficit. And what they try and do is continue eating those calories, thinking that if they eat more, they're going to gain weight. But what you want to remember is it's the deficit that's led you to lose the weight. So what your maintenance calories would be is a lot more like 1850 or 2000 per day. So as soon as you finish the diet and you're really happy with where you're at, you just want to chuck those calories straight back up. The quicker you throw them up, then the quicker you recover any metabolic adaptation that's occurred during the dieting process. So keep in mind that metabolic adaptation is normal. It's a healthy function of the body to preserve your life. So you have to work with this concept in order to have lasting fat loss. So that one tends to be very psychological, and what happens is because you keep trying to keep the calories low, your metabolism is actually going to adapt, because at some point the fat loss is going to stop, and you don't want to get stuck at your dream weight where you've done all this hard work and you're feeling really great, but now you're petrified of food. So the best thing, chuck them straight back up by at least 300 calories a day, probably better to be about 400. And then from there, you actually just want to keep laddering them up every few weeks. So let's just say you started your whole dieting process on 2,500 calories, you actually want to end up back there, but at the new body weight. And now the weight loss is maintainable. So it's not that diets don't work, it's that we don't approach them properly and we don't recover from them properly. My third mistake is, it's super common but rarely talked about, and this is that we often don't deal with the reason we're overweight in the first place. Body fat is protective at its fundamental function, and additionally it's one of those things that you can easily get pleasure from. So when we eat especially junk foods with a really lovely combination of salt, sugar and fat, which never underestimate how good food companies make you feel pleasure when you eat them. That makes food addictive. And if we are, say, low in joy, or if we have trouble feeling pleasure, then we are probably going to lean to food, and we learn this from a very young age. So if you have a food addiction, it's likely to do with a lack of joy or pleasure in everyday life in some way, or an inability to feel it, or you just have this default mechanism where you tend to just turn to food every time there's a challenge. Body fat is also protective against environmental toxins, so it kind of wraps them up, anything that the liver can't process, and stores it away to protect the rest of your body. And another reason why you might have gained weight in the first place or been overweight is because your body is just too inflamed. It just does not handle junk food well. So we don't all have healthy constitutions. If you have a multitude of health conditions, or you struggle with your weight your whole life, or even for a period of time as an adult, you probably don't have a healthy constitution. Not all of us can get away with eating like donuts and gluten and ice cream and all of that stuff without negative consequences. So it's a really great idea to kind of tune into your body and how does it feel? Like if you eat junk food or fried food, do you feel fatigued after you've eaten it? Like I understand it feels great when you eat it, but after you finish eating it, do you feel fatigued? Do you have a headache? Do you feel tired? Do you feel depressed? Do you feel anxious? Like what happens in the body? Because if you don't just feel neutral, the body's not processing that food very well. It's actually created what we call neuroinflammation, which is inflammation in the nervous system. And this can damage your gut, affect your mood, and affect your assimilation of nutrients. And when we're low on nutrients, we often want to eat more food. So my biggest tip here is it's not to believe that diets don't work, because they do. It's to really explore why you're stuck in this cycle in the first place. Do you have a food addiction? Do you have trouble cutting the junk food out? Because if you do, then that's something you want to look into through a professional, a psychologist or a counselor or something like that. Like I understand that this is definitely probably the most uncomfortable one to overcome, but it is the most empowering if you can. Like I've done it myself, that's why I kind of know this information. I had eating disorder when I was younger. At the end of the day, it turned out it was linked to some emotional issues that I had from my childhood. So in going through that and kind of healing that, I then didn't really rely on food as comfort, because I feel comforted within myself naturally. It wasn't easy, but it was totally worth it. So my fourth point for you is over exercising. So this kind of goes into the too much too soon point, but it's just to understand that more training is not necessarily going to be better for fat loss. So something like HIIT training or CrossFit or weight training, when it comes to squatting, deadlifting, bench pressing, all those barbell movements, it's actually really hard on your nervous system. So when you want to lose fat, you want to be careful not to be doing too much hard training. And you also don't want to do something like a really hard weights workout like CrossFit and then on the other side of the day climb on the stairs for 50 minutes like the Stairmaster, because it's just too much. What we usually do with fat loss, we want to keep stress as low as we can keep it within reason, because we are stressing the body. That's what's causing the fat loss. But as soon as there's too much stress, the fat loss will stall. So what that might look like is 4 or 5 weight training sessions a week and a walk. or we might increase steps or just daily movement. So that's kind of the way we would do it. This is not including bodybuilding competitions. There's a lot more extreme methods that people go to for that because you're actually trying to get to an extreme level of leanness. But we're talking about general fat loss here that you can maintain. So you want to train in a kind of gentle way. You want to make sure that you're not overdoing it. Remember, you're not an elite athlete, most likely. So you actually want to train for your training level and what your body can handle and recover from. And just as an example of this, I just competed last year in bodybuilding and I lost my cycle for 3 months because calories were too low, my movement was too high, and I was too lean for what my body considers to be safe. I felt well, I felt fine actually, but having lost the cycle tells you that I cannot stay like that. Because whether it is the food's too low, whether it is the fact that I'm too lean, or whether it is the fact that I'm training so much because I was doing double cardio on some days, as well as weight training. It's hard to know because there's so much going on at once, but that's personally what my body has to do to get into that condition. As a coach, I don't let my clients push themselves to the point where they lose their cycle because that is way outside of my duty of care. And I would say the same to you. If you ever lose your cycle, something's not right there. The body's in an energy deficit to the point where it's actually not good for your reproductive health. And if your reproductive health is affected, then everything is probably going to be affected. And again, back to my case, I got my cycle back about 2 months after, but I had put on 5 kilos. So as soon as I reached that healthy weight and I was eating way more carbohydrates and moving much less, it came back and there's been no problem since. Okay, so over-exercising and pushing your body too hard does not have positive effects in the long term. My 5th mistake that I see all the time is jumping on diet trends and just hoping for weight loss. So here I'm speaking about things like keto, isogenics, carnivore, veganism. You know, most of the time the reason these things get headway is because they'll sell it as a fat loss thing. They won't sell it as a health thing, it'll be a fat loss thing. And people go, oh, okay, well I'll try vegan because I've tried everything and I can't lose weight. The problem with something like veganism is the carbs are so high that most of us are insulin resistant to a degree and will not thrive on that diet. You might actually put on weight. Then we have the carnivore where you're missing out on fibrous plants, which for most people is probably not going to be beneficial. Isogenics is a shake diet. You know, who wants to drink shakes for the rest of their life? You're probably not going to be able to maintain that. And also there's less churning going on in the stomach. So when you actually do start to eat proper food, you're going to get very full and backed up very easily. You know, and keto's fine, but the long-term implications of keto is dangerous for most people because the body starts to crave carbs, especially if you're active. Okay, so keto as a solution short-term to get you on track, fantastic, but the carbs have to come back in. Otherwise, the body is going to start upregulating some mechanisms to get you to eat them. And usually when you eat them, you're not just going to add some potatoes in your diet every day. You might go completely rogue on all sorts of packet of foods. Like that's the way I always see it. And that's why I consider keto to be a dangerous diet. So that's the way I always see it playing out. And then the last mistake that I want to highlight is not making a plan. So it requires a plan. It requires you to analyze that plan. It requires you to follow a consistent routine. That's how you get lasting fat loss. You have to know what you're doing, why you're doing it, how long you're doing it for, and what result you're getting in order to have successful fat loss. I'll give you an example of a chart that I have with one of my clients. So just pop it up on the screen. This is a check-in form. So as you can see, it goes week by week by week. She checks in every Wednesday and there's a plan. So there's a building phase at the moment and then there's going to be a fat loss stage in about 9 weeks time. So what we're doing at the moment is really building up her metabolism so she can eat as much food as possible so that we can maximize that and so she can put on as much muscle as possible. And then we're going to drop those calories down by about 300 or 400 a day. And she's going to start losing fat come competition prep time because her goal is to do a competition. So the higher the calories are to start with, the better. And we won't be starting with cardio either. It'll just be the same weight training routine with a calorie deficit. And so those are my top mistakes that I see. And I really hope that that helped you. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment or contact me directly. And I'll see you next week.